Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. And thanks again for stopping by. I'd like to thank Angel Jones and her team at the Homecoming Revolution for a super event this weekend in London. It was great to be in Olympia for the Homecoming Revolution. It really was fabulous. Angel is very relentless, has created a wonderful forum and situation with the Homecoming Revolution. And I'm going to put up a photograph of her describing the African homecomer and another one of myself presenting at the conference. And really was a tremendous event. I enjoyed it thoroughly. My home thoughts are it was really a pleasure as always to catch up with my old school friend Alex Michaelis and his mother Nina and family. I thank them as well. We even managed to go to Alex's box at Loftus Road on Saturday afternoon and watch QPR. He's been a fan for eternity. It was a 3-0 victory for QPR, so it was a lot of fun. And it was a pleasure catching up with Nisha's brother and his wife as well. Political reflections. More than 95% of Crimean voters backed joining Russia, local officials said. Moscow says it will accept the result. President Obama has warned Moscow that Washington is also ready to impose costs over its actions in Ukraine. Earlier, the EU said in a statement that the vote was illegal and illegitimate, and its outcome will not be recognized. Sergei Askinov, Crimea's leader installed last month after the Russian takeover, appeared on stage in Crimea's regional capital, Simferopol, backed by the Russian national anthem, Russian flags, and the personnel of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. He told supporters that Crimea was going home. My conclusions are, as I said from the beginning, it is a fait accompli. I'll put up a Crimea map for you to look at, and bear in mind that really, had Putin lost Crimea, he was essentially castrated. Russia would be castrated as a global power, and therefore I think it was simply unconscionable. We would want to be sure we are welcomed with flowers, that's of course Dick Cheney's famous quote about Iraq, before annexing any territory in eastern Ukraine, Kremlin analyst Sergei Markov told Bloomberg News yesterday. We can rule out that Putin will limit himself to Crimea. Jörg Vorbrig, a senior program officer at the Berlin Bureau of the German Marshall Fund of the US, said in a phone interview, there is no prospect of self-restraint on the part of Putin's Kremlin. What happens next? Asked the New Yorker. On Thursday, I met with Sergei Aksionov, Crimea's self-appointed prime minister, and asked him that. Nothing at all will happen, he said, with a disingenuous-seeming shrug of the shoulders. In other words, Crimea would join Russia, and that would be that. And now I take you back to Zbigniew Brzezinski, who wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, and he said this about Ukraine. Ukraine is a new and important space on the Eurasian chessboard. It's a geopolitical pivot, because its very existence as an independent country helps to transform Russia. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. However, if Moscow regains control over Ukraine with its 52 million people and major resources, as well as access to the Black Sea, that's the key geopolitical issue, Russia automatically again regains the wherewithal to become a powerful imperial state spanning Europe and Asia. He said Ukraine, Azerbaijan, South Korea, Turkey, and Iran play the role of critically important geopolitical pivots. I'll put up a photograph of Vladimir Putin, and he's been winning for a while now. And the New Yorker says Putin likes to think of himself as a geopolitical grandmaster. My conclusion is he is. And in particular, when people start banding around the Hitler comparison, you know he's winning big time. Moving on to the mysterious disappearance of the MH370, Reports suggest person who sent all right, good night message from MH370 knew the system had been shut down. Najib said Saturday that the flight was still communicating with satellites until 8:11 a.m., 7.5 hours after takeoff and more than 90 minutes after it was due in Beijing. I'll put up a photograph of that very same plane. The last satellite transmission from the Malaysian airliner missing for a week has been traced to the Indian Ocean off Australia, far from where searches have taken place, according to a person familiar with the analysis. A path from Malaysia to the ocean off Australia would have taken as much as 3,000 miles, about the maximum distance the Boeing could have flown with its fuel load. Flight 370 may have flown beyond its last known position about 1,000 miles west of Perth, and that location may not be an indication of where the plane ended up. I'll put up a photograph that I found via at NYC Jim, plotting all 634 runways that were apparently in range of this plane. The plane apparently dropped to an altitude of 5,000 feet or possibly lower to defeat commercial secondary radar coverage after it turned back from its Kuala Lumpur-Beijing route on March 8. Their investigators are poring over the Boeing 777's flight profile to determine if it had flown low and used terrain masking during most of the 8 hours it was missing from the radar coverage of possibly at least 3 countries. Top officials who make up the technical team that had been holed up from morning till late at night here are looking at the possibility that the jetliner carrying 239 people had taken advantage of the busy airways over the Bay of Bengal. By sticking to commercial routes, the flight may not have raised the suspicion of those manning primary military radars of the nations it overflew. To them, MH370 would appear to be just another commercial aircraft on its way to its destination. The person who had control over the aircraft has a solid knowledge of avionics and navigation and left a clean track. It passed low over Kelantan. That was true, said officials. It's possible that the aircraft had hugged the terrain in some areas that are mountainous to avoid radar detection. This technique is called terrain masking and is used by military pilots to fly to their targets stealthily, using the topography to mask their approach from prying microwaves. This type of flying is considered very dangerous, especially in low light conditions and spatial disorientation, and air sickness could easily set in. The stresses and loads it puts on the airframe, especially an airliner of the 777 size, are tremendous. Debka, which tends to be associated with Mossad, says the US, Russian, Chinese military satellites are hunting MH370 over Central Asia and asking, is it ready for a terrorist attack? I'll put up another image I found by the Wall Street Journal, which shows a closer look at how the 2 possible paths of the plane were calculated. Then I'll sign off from Political Reflections with a photograph of 2 young men sitting next to a railroad bridge that was destroyed by the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Currency markets: the euro is at 139.02, dollar index at 79.47, the yen at 101.50, Swissy at 0.8735, the pound 166.40, Aussie remains above 0.90 at 0.9057, India rupee at 61.11, South Korean won 1067.75, the rial 235.63, Egyptian pound 695.18, South African rand 1068.95. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. It's at 79.47 last. Until I see it go above 80, it's really good. I think it continues to trade soft. Euro dollar 139.02, My stock remains at 133.80. Dollar yen last trading at 101.50, and you will recall I said it was a trading buy above 103. Treasuries held by foreign central banks dropped by 104 billion to 2.86 trillion in the week ending March 12, according to Fed data. The timing of the drop in custody holdings makes Russia a more likely suspect, said Mark Chandler. If Russia did it, then they may have transferred the holdings to another bank outside of the US. And clearly it is Russia's holdings are about 1% of the $12.3 trillion of marketable treasuries outstanding. So clearly they've taken preemptive action as well. A 132-unit luxury project for auto enthusiasts called the Porsche Design Tower. Condos at the 60-story building featuring an elevator that transports cars directly into the homes range from $4.5 million to $32.5 million. With the Oceanfront Towers Foundation not yet in place, 113 of its 132 units had sold as of earlier this week. All buyers placed deposits of 30% in cash. Seed money DESA relied on to gauge interest in the project on Sunny Isles Beach. London home prices rise to a record amid focus on stimulus. Asking prices for homes in London surged to a record this month as the buoyant outlook spread to other parts of the country, according to Rightmove. Prices climbed 2.1% from February to £552,530, taking the annual appreciation to more than 11%. And I said on the 12th of August, the last time I was in London, that I reckon there is an outside chance that UK property, which is projected to rally 25% over 5 years, achieves that in 24 to 30 months. Gold futures climbed 3% last week. Wheat jumped 5.1% last week because of the Ukraine issue. They're a big wheat producer. I'll put up a 3-month chart of gold, up 15% in 2014, and that's all about the perceived tail risk. And I think we should see it now soften a little bit, because I'm of the view that Crimea is a fait accompli. Crude oil last at $98.61. As I said, when it was above 100, that was nosebleed territory. Copper has dropped 13% this year to the lowest levels since 2010. The slump in the price of copper, which accounts for 70% of Zambia's export earnings, has seen the kwacha weaken 8.3% this year, the worst performer among the African currencies tracked by Bloomberg. I'll put up a 3-month chart of copper. Coming to emerging markets, the cost of insuring against default on Russian bonds in the next 5 years, as measured by credit default swaps, has risen to 278 basis points, or 2.78% of the value of the bonds insured, up from 165 basis points on January 1st. I think that's a buy as well. The MICEX fell 7.6% in Moscow last week, extending its rout this month to 14%. It's down 21% from a January 2013 high. I'll put up a chart that I found on Bloomberg. I think it's a big buy. Russian equities have the cheapest valuations among 21 developing countries monitored by Bloomberg. Shares on the MICEX are trading at 4.5 times projected 12-month earnings, compared with a multiple of 10 for the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. The Russian ruble, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, was last at 36.6545. Dubai has rolled over $20 billion of loans at below the national inflation rate. It had debt maturing this year equivalent to a third of its economy, refinanced $20 billion at a quarter of the original cost, freeing cash to service liabilities and fund expansion plans. Sheikhdom rolled over $10 billion of bonds owed to the central bank and a loan of the same amount due to Abu Dhabi's government, and will pay a fixed interest of 1% on both. Dubai and its state-owned companies borrowed more than $110 billion developing the real estate industry and transforming the Sheikhdom into a tourism and financial services hub. The emirate, which announced plans to spend $8 billion gearing up to host the World Expo in 2020, faced $30 billion of maturities in 2014, according to the IMF. Now that they have refinanced a chunk of what's due this year, the remainder suddenly looks much more manageable. I think we'll see a further acceleration in asset prices in Dubai. I'll put up a photograph of skyscrapers and buildings as they stand in the Business Bay development area in Dubai, and a photograph that I took 23 days ago as I flew out of Dubai. Coming to Africa, excuse me, major European and Saudi banks have stopped dealings with Sudan, further straining the indebted and cash-starved economy. Major European and Saudi banks have stopped dealing with Sudan, diplomatic and other sources say, while Khartoum blames increased pressure from a US trade embargo first imposed 17 years ago. A US official said there'd be no change in policy from Washington, according to AFP. Most of the accounts or money going out of Sudan is completely frozen, said a local banker. I think this is something actually mushrooming, he said, of the risk aversion. Germany's Commerzbank was the latest to sever its Sudan connection, according to diplomats. In 2012, British banks HSBC and Standard Chartered were fined $1.92 billion and $677 million, respectively, for violations that included sanction breaches with Iran and Sudan. The same year, Dutch bank ING agreed to pay $619 million to settle US government accusations that it conducted banned transactions involving Sudan and other countries. The EU itself has no embargo against Sudan, whose government seized power 25 years ago in a coup. European banks with US branches or business are closing any Sudanese accounts and won't even process payments from Sudan. A local bank who asked not to be named said that starting this month, Saudi banks too had stopped dealing with the African nation. The World Bank is set to fund the Congo Dam, likely to approve $73 million next week to fund an expansion of the Inga hydroelectric dam in the DRC. And that's a positive. I'll put up a photograph of the Inga Dam that I found. The South African All Shares back to only being up 1% this year, having set a sequence of record highs. GE is set to lead the bid for part of a $3.2 billion South African rail plan. They're really making their move on the African continent. Dollar rand 1069.375. I'll put up a 3-month chart. We're at the top end of the range for the rand. Egyptian pound firm at 695.34. The Egyptian stock market, the best performing stock market in Africa, up 19.88%. Nigeria down 7.33% in 2014. This is a fresh 2014 low. The Ghana Stock Exchange, where most of your returns have been eroded by a weak cedi, is up 12.03% in 2014. Zambia's dollar security due in September 2012 lost 9.7% in the past 12 months, compared with a 17% return in African sovereign bonds. Not difficult to work out why. Fiscal shortfall, weak copper prices, all have led to a serious change in attitude towards Zambia. Coming to Kenya, the yield on Treasury bills dropped to 8.946% at last week's auction from 9.011% previously, amid massive demand for securities. The rates are heading south, said a fixed income trader with a commercial bank. Government is not under pressure as they are ahead of their borrowing program for their financial year. I wrote about this in January. I said the Eurobond issue will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets, and we should see a good rally in interest rates, and I think we're getting that now. I was talking about the Eurobond being a big Wembley Stadium moment, um, and I was inclined to the view that the Kenya government should slot the Eurobond market the entire $2 billion, and I think that's the expectation of the Eurobond, which has led to the sharp rally in interest rates. The Nairobi oil shares up 5.56% this year. This week we're expecting announcements from Co-op Bank on Wednesday and potentially Standard Chartered and National Bank, which are both yet to indicate the dates that they'll do their release. The NSE 20 jumped 0.47% on Friday. The stock market here is a little bit weaker today. Remember, if you want to plug into the live feed, just register on rich.co.ke, get a password, and go to Rich Live, where during trading hours you can watch the market, demand, supply, last prices, or anything you care to mention. Once again, thank you for stopping by. It's appreciated.